I have some handy tricks to show you how to make piecing my newest pattern, Cotillion, so much more fun. So this video will show you, it's sort of a supplement to the instructions, and it will show you more of a visual of some of the tricks that I've figured out while I was designing this pattern. In the Cotillion quilt, you have two blocks. You have this block construction, and then you also have a series of just solid blocks. This block is 4 triangles surrounding, sort of swirling around this center square. And the triangles can be something that you need to be thoughtful of as you cut your pieces and construct this block. This is a printed copy of the pattern. You may have also gotten the PDF version. So if you got that, it would be a file. But I wanted to call your attention to page 7. This is the template that you need in order. When you print out the 2 copies, you definitely want to print them out without any scaling, and you need to make sure that the little square in the bottom right of each of them equals 1 inch. That's how to know that you have the right pattern size. From here, I'm going to ask you to cut these out. I have a rotary cutter that I use just for cutting paper templates, and it really is better to cut these templates with a rotary cutter than it is with scissors. So you'll notice that I cut on the outside line. These templates include seam allowances, and so you'll want to cut yours out on the outside line. So now you have 2 identical templates. If you have a square ruler, you can actually use these 2 templates taped onto this square ruler to cut your fabric. It's pretty simple. So you need 2 because one part of the pattern template is going to go on a corner of your square ruler. Now you're not looking at the measurements on the ruler, really you're just using this ruler. This is a 12.5 by 12.5 because both templates will fit on this ruler. So I'm going to take just a tiny bit of double stick tape and just carefully stick it to the underside of the template. You don't need a ton of tape. You're going to be laying this on your fabric, and the reason I ask you to stick it on the back is because it's more accurate, as you know. For the second one, we're using this template for just this one long angle. So I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to put a little piece of double stick tape there. And what I'm going to do is position it underneath the ruler, edge to edge here at the end, and tape it to the underside of the ruler so that I can use this long edge. Now again, I'm not paying attention to any of the marks on the rulers. I'm just using this square ruler to hold these 2 templates. So now you have your templates ready to cut your fabric. So I'm going to press out my fabric here. Now the pattern calls for you cutting from fat quarters. I'm just using a piece here that I know I can get the templates cut from. And just another tip, if I'm doing fat quarters or something like that, I'll usually press 2 at a time just because it's so much easier than doing 1 at a time. And because this quilt is fairly scrappy, the instructions will tell you how many of each square you'll need to cut triangles from. But I usually, if I'm cutting using a template like I'm showing you, I might cut one at a time just to be on the safe side. So the first thing you'll do is lay your fat quarter or piece of fabric out and cut So the first line I'm going to cut is the long bottom line. Now I want you to pay attention to the markings on the pattern template. You'll notice that this long side says cut on straight of grain. And the straight of grain goes either perpendicular to the selvage, which is right here on this piece of fabric, or it goes parallel to the selvage. And the reason I ask you to do that is because if you try to cut this piece like this, or somehow diagonally across the fabric in order to save fabric or something like that, you're going to end up with a bias edge on this long edge, and it's going to stretch and distort. So let's look at the original block again. So you definitely always want the outer sides of any quilt block you make to be on the straight of grain so that your points and everything will line up really nicely. Count on your ruler 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. You want to cut a 5.5-inch strip from your fat quarter, whatever you're cutting from. So I would do that in one long strip. You could use the ruler that your template is on, or you can use a ruler that you have, just a long ruler that will stretch across the fabric, but you want to cut a 5.5-inch strip across your fabric. And I'm cutting mine perpendicular to the selvage. So now we're going to treat one of these edges as this long edge. The next thing we're going to do is take the other template taped on the corner, and we're going to cut these sides. And if you cut that way, so there's your first triangle. And if I flip, not really flip, I mean, if I rotate this all the way around 180 degrees, I can actually use the opposing edge of the fabric now at for the straight of grain, for the long edge, and I can cut another, oops, I can cut another triangle. This way, you don't have to use a special triangle ruler or anything. You just keep these on as long as you need them on your square ruler, and then pull them off, and you're done with that template once you cut everything. So now I'm in section C, where you sew the blocks together. I've laid out my block like I have it here in the diagram. And I would suggest that you do this for each block, because what we're going to be doing is starting on one side and working our way counterclockwise to sew these triangles to each other and to the center square. It's not hard, but it's easy to lose track. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew a partial seam to this top triangle. Now what that means is that I'm putting this little flower, which I kind of fussy cut to go for the center. You're going to lay that over the corner just like that, line it up, and you're going to start sewing halfway along that little piece of fabric all the way to the end. So let me do that with the sewing machine and I'll show you how it's done. All right, so as you can see, I've sewn just a tiny bit more than halfway across that seam. I did take a back stitch at the beginning, but you don't have to. That's entirely up to you. The other thing to keep in mind is do not press this until you're done. So what I do is I finger press just along where I sewed, because now this whole top unit is going to be joined to this side unit. So I'm just doing a little finger press, and then I'm laying this whole piece across the next piece. Now I'm going to sew from here all the way off to the edge. So now I've sewed these two pieces together. Again, I'm not going to press, I'm just going to finger press to get that flat. And then I'm going to join this piece to this side here, lining up with the edge of the little square and sewing right off the edge. So now you see I've sewn all three pieces around this way, and now I'm going to join this last one, and this is going to show you exactly why we made this little partial seam. So you see I've still got part of this square, this center square, unsewn. So now I'm going to take this, line it up at the edge of that square, and sew that all the way to the edge. So that kind of shows you, I hope, why I didn't do any pressing on this, because if you crease that square where it's not sewn, it just kind of makes it a little harder to join together. So let me sew that. So now you can see we've got one last seam here. I've closed, or I've sewn this fourth piece on. And in order to sew this piece, you're going to turn it right sides together. And just FYI, when I'm finger pressing the seams around the center square, I'm pressing all of the seam allowances to the outside, away from that center square. So now I'm going to close up this last seam. So hopefully you can see where the stitching ended. And I'm going to start there and stitch all the way towards the end. And there you have your completed block. And at this point, you can press it. So let's press it into shape. And there you have it. All of your outer seams are not going to stretch. They're on the straight of grain. All of your bias seams are safely inside. And that is how you make the pieced block for the Cotillion quilt.